Zen and the art of software development. I did this talk about 10 years ago, very early in my speaking career, and I haven't done it for ages. And some people on Twitter were talking about the book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and wouldn't that make a good talk? And I went, I did a talk on that. And they said, oh, you should do it again. So here we are. So I have attempted to reconstruct my talk forensically from the slides and remember what I talked about. So apologies if it's a little bit rough around the edges. But yes, so this is based on the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, which was published in the 1970s. And it's a story about himself, and he is on a motorcycle trip. He goes from Missouri to California on this exact bike, in fact. So it's kind of a true story that's been turned into a novel. And this was his Honda CB77. And he died in 2017. And when he died, his wife donated the motorcycle to the Smithsonian in America. And now it's part of their American history exhibit. And in the book, he's riding this bike and he's got his son on the back, and he's riding with a couple of friends called John and Sylvia. And you never actually get the narrator's name in the book. He's just he doesn't give himself a name. And there's a great line at the start of the book in the introduction where he says that this should in no way be associated with that great body of factual information relating to orthodox Zen Buddhist practice. And it's not very factual on motorcycles either. And I'm going to claim that disclaimer for this talk as well. But yes, he rides on his Honda CB77, and they ride through the mountains in Montana. And along the way, you get this story of this character called Phaedrus, which is a Greek name that comes from Plato's philosophy. And Phaedrus's philosophical explorations and his attempts to define the world and understand the world. And you learn all of this, and you gradually learn about what the narrator's relationship to this Phaedrus is. And I'm going to say, you know, everyone should read the book. And so I won't sort of spoil the ending. But at the end, you find out what his relationship to Phaedrus is. Robert Pirsig, who wrote the book, actually also wrote technical manuals for IBM. So he was involved in the software industry right back at the start of the software industry, really. And so I think quite a lot of what he wrote can apply to software development and the software business. But he starts off, or Phaedrus started off, by defining two ways of understanding the world and understanding technology in particular. And he called them the classic view and the romantic view. And these are two completely different ways of looking at the same things. And the classic view, as he describes it, it looks at the underlying technology itself. It looks at how things are put together, how they work. It's the view that sort of takes something apart and puts it back together again just to figure out how it works. And people who have the classic view are logical and rational, and they're looking for the underlying truth of everything and of reality. And then the romantic view is concerned with what things look like, what the surface of the thing is. And for me, it defines Apple. It's about what does it look like? Is it shiny? Do the screens cost $999? And our job as software developers, we have to take the classic view of understanding how things work and knowing how to make them work and change them, and then apply that to create things for people who have the romantic viewpoint. And so we hide away all the complexity and the nuts and bolts and bits and bytes of the computer and networking and the internet and everything else, and we turn it into something nice, that looks nice, that's nice to use, nice to interact with, and then we ship that to people who have the romantic view of the world. And I think we have a classic view of computers in particular, and the people we make software for have a romantic view of computers. That's not to say that they are romantic people. They have a romantic view of everything. They could be civil engineers and building bridges, or mechanics and building cars, or surgeons and diving into people and cutting them up and making things happen. So everybody has a romantic view of some things and classic views of other things. But trying to bring these two views together, trying to combine them so that you can have the classic view of understanding how something works, but also have the romantic view of how it looks, how it feels, whether it's good or bad. The narrator of this book, he defines it as quality, and then most of the book is this obsession about what quality is and where it comes from. And that's what originally gave me the idea to do a talk based on this, because we seem to spend an awful lot of time in our industry talking about quality, how do we achieve quality, what defines quality, and nobody can seem to agree what it is. And the book defines it as a bringing together of the classic understanding and the romantic view into a single view of the world. And if you can combine those two things together, then you can get a feel for the quality of what it is that you're building, what it is that you're doing, and create something that is good and that people will like and enjoy using and that you can be proud of. And he tells a story in the book of taking his motorcycle to be repaired. And he takes it to a mechanic and goes back to pick it up, and the problem hasn't been fixed, and he says it's still got the same problem, and the mechanic says, okay, I'll take a look, and then goes to take the bolts off a cover and strips the bolts, and then goes, oh dear, I stripped the bolts, and so then he tries to drill them out and then makes a hole through the cover that he's trying to drill out, and the guy just says, you know what, just give me the parts and I'm going to go and I will learn how to repair it myself. And he learns how to repair his own motorcycle, and he develops this Zen attitude towards working on his motorcycle and learning how it works and cleaning it and maintaining it and looking after it. And he says that quality arises when you care about what you do. And the problem with the mechanic at the shop was that he didn't care. He didn't care about the work he was doing. He was just doing it to get it done, to get it out the door, collect his paycheck, and go home. Whereas if you care, then you focus on what you're doing and you do it properly. And that is how you can achieve quality in your work, by focusing on it, by doing the work for the sake of the work, and doing it well, and not rushing to get to the finish line and get out the door, or rushing to launch a particular feature. You need to slow down, care about what you're doing, and then the quality will take care of itself. And then the next thing he looks at is something called Stuckness, which I think is a great word. And when you're, in his way, working on your motorcycle, you can get to a point where you're trying to diagnose a problem, or trying to fix a problem, trying to resolve an issue with the motorcycle, and you get stuck, and you don't know what to do, and you're just frozen completely. And according to the book, the reason you get stuck is because you're looking at the facts and you're looking at them from one point of view, and you're unable to pull back and look at the existing facts in new ways. And the longer you stare at them, the worse that problem gets. And he says what you should do when you get stuck like this is to stop and do something else entirely. Work on something else. So pull out another project that you're working on and work on that. Or if you've got a hobby, go and do your hobby for a little while. Just step away from it and distract yourself and let your subconscious deal with the thing that you're stuck on. And then when you come back to it, your subconscious will have looked at it from all sorts of different angles and may come up with a solution to the problem that your conscious mind couldn't. There's a psychological theory that we can only hold 7 or 8 pieces of information in our conscious mind, but our subconscious can deal with far more information than that, which is why I don't know if you've ever had this experience when you're playing a video game. Sometimes I will be playing a video game at 10 o'clock at night, and I am completely stuck. I cannot get past a level. And it's impossible. And I just turn the Xbox off in disgust and go to bed. And then the next day I'll sit down at the Xbox and I'll boot the game up and I will just get straight through the bit that I was stuck on. And the theory is that it's because my subconscious has had time to process everything and figure out how to actually do something. And so when you get stuck, just stop, walk away, work on something else, read a book, juggle, play cards, do whatever it is. Just do something else and then come back to it and see if you can see the problem in a different way. He also talks about science, and we think of science as this process of doing experiments, and when we're developing software, we come up with lots of different ways that we can solve the problem, and we sit down and we sort of try this and we type a bunch of code and we see if it works, and then we type another bunch of code and see if that works. And this is not, he says, this is not the fundamentals of science. Science is about thinking of hypotheses than doing more than doing experiments. And so what he recommends is, before you start doing anything, before you start sitting down and typing code, or before you start working on your motorcycle, just stop and stare into space and think. And we need to create an understanding in our workplaces and with our employers and our managers and our scrum masters and all those evil people, that actually when we're just sitting there staring off into space, that's when we're doing our best work. And it's okay to be sitting there and doing that. And, go outside and get some sun while you're doing it. Just make sure that you stay at least 2 meters away from everybody else at the moment. So then he talks about how working in this way, how focusing on the work that you're doing and caring about the quality of the work that you're doing will help you to achieve peace of mind. And people try all sorts of different things to achieve peace of mind. They try meditation, they try listening to calming things. They try yoga, they may go for a run, but peace of mind actually comes from settling your brain down, settling your thoughts down, and getting them to focus on one thing and just doing that thing to the best of your ability. If you're completely absorbed in your work, then your mind is actually very peaceful, and you get into what's called the flow state. And I'm sure every developer has been there, when you're sitting and you're working and the code is just flowing out of your fingers and everything's going perfectly. And if you've ever had that thing where you type code for about 2 hours and then you test it and it works first time, that's what that is. That's flow. And by learning to slow down and focus on the work that we're doing, we can achieve peace of mind. We can achieve a Zen-like state without meditating, without anything else. There's a great quote about Zen that's not from the book, but it's from a Zen master, Japanese, can't remember his name. And he said that Zen is not about thinking spiritual thoughts while doing the washing up. Zen is just doing the washing up. And Zen exists in everything. If you do it with the right attitude and you absorb yourself in it and you focus on it and you do it properly, then you can achieve a Zen-like state no matter what you're doing. And I think that's great. I quite like that idea, and I like getting into that state when I'm working, and feeling calm and focused, and when I finish my work, kind of actually feeling refreshed rather than exhausted. So that's something to aim for. And then towards the end of the book, he starts to talk about the things that get in the way of doing your work in this way, of approaching your work and your life in this way. And he uses a great word. It's an old Scottish word, gumption. And gumption is like the enthusiasm, or the get up and go is an English expression for it. And to do anything well, to do anything properly, he says you need an adequate supply of gumption. And you need if you're not feeling enthusiastic about doing the work, don't do the work, because you won't do it properly. But if you're enthusiastic, if you're looking forward to it, then dive in. But if you're not, do something else. Actually tell yourself, I am not allowed to do this. And eventually you'll get to this point where you're kind of going, oh, I really, really want to do it. And then you're okay. Then you can start. I appreciate that that's possibly not going to sit well with HR and the people who sign your timesheets. But as much as possible, do the thing that you're enthusiastic about doing, and put off the thing that you currently have no enthusiasm for. And so, talking about gumption, he gets into what he calls gumption traps. And these are the things you can start off and you can be very enthusiastic and you can be working on your project and it's going great and you're having a fantastic time. And then you hit one of these gumption traps and you suddenly, it's all gone and you feel terrible and you don't know how you're going to get forwards, move forwards. And he identifies two primary kinds of gumption traps, and he calls them external and internal. And the external gumption traps he calls setbacks. And setbacks is when you're working on the project and everything's going well, and then you hit something and you don't know how to proceed any further, and it just completely knocks all the wind out of you and you don't know how to proceed. And he's talking about this in the context of motorcycle repair. And so his example is you get to a point where you've taken all the things apart and you've found the bit that's broken and you fixed it or you've replaced it and you're putting the motorcycle back together again. And then you kind of go, oh, hang on a minute. Why have I got 8 pieces left over when my motorcycle's gone back together? And now you've got to take it apart again. And that's that's when the gumption leaves you, when you're kind of going, oh, I've just gone down this and now I've got to take it all apart again and put it all back again. And his solution to this in the context of motorcycle repair is to lay out all the parts as you're taking the motorcycle apart, like they're in a book. And this isn't a motorcycle, it's a typewriter. And then, so you start at the top left and you lay them out to the bottom right, and then when you're putting that together again, you start at the bottom right and you work your way back up to the top left. But of course, we don't have parts. The best way I've thought of applying the parts analogy to software development is it's a great argument for building small components, either object-oriented components or methods within classes or functions if you're a functional programmer, and keeping them as small as possible and knowing how they fit together. And then if something somewhere breaks, you're not having to scroll through hundreds of lines of code to try and find where it is. You've got a pretty good idea where the different components are. And for that to work properly, then those components need to be tested, which is where you get into test-driven development. And test-driven development is, I think, the most zen way of coding that there is, because you get into this lovely cycle, lovely focused, tight loop, and you write a test, and the test is red, you make the test go green, and then you refactor, and then you write the next test, and you get into this loop. And if you've ever got into the zone, got into the flow state while doing test-driven development, then you know how effective this can be. It really can. I use Visual Studio a lot, and I use nCrunch in Visual Studio, which just has a little grid down at the bottom right of the window that is red when the tests aren't passing, and it goes green when all the tests passed again, and then you refactor. But having those tests in place, if you hit a setback, then it makes it much easier to work out where that setback is and fix just that component without having to take everything apart and start again. And then he talks about the internal gumption traps. And the first of these, and the worst, is what he calls value traps. And value traps is an inability to let go of your values and reevaluate the problem at hand. And he comes up with 4 reasons you can hit this. And the first is egotism. So the first is thinking, I'm great, I can't be wrong, I must be right, therefore something else is wrong. And he says you have to let go of the ego and accept that you can be wrong, and reevaluate the situation. And then the flip side of ego is anxiety. And anxiety is, maybe I don't understand this, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not clever enough. It's what we call imposter syndrome in our industry. And with that, you have to kind of just reassure yourself, you go, look, this is what I've done. I did that repair, I wrote that code. I do know what I'm doing. The third value trap is boredom. And boredom is very dangerous. If you find yourself bored with what you're doing, again, walk away from it, do something else, and come back when you're not bored. And then finally, impatience. So when you are just hurrying to get something done, and that might be because you need to get it done before you can leave for the day, or because you want to get something launched, or because there's pressure on you from a boss. But that impatience to get something done will cause you to cut corners and not do things properly. And so you have to try and avoid impatience. Then there are truth traps. And truth traps, very simple. It's when you're looking at a question and you're looking for is this right or is this wrong answer? It's a yes-no duality. And not all questions have yes-no answers. And so you might be looking at something and saying, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And just looking at those two as the yes and no, and missing the fact that there is a third answer, or that the question is wrong and you're you can't find an answer to the question because it's the wrong question to be asking. And then finally, there are muscle traps. And muscle traps, again, with motorcycles, he's talking about unsuitable tools, he's talking about physical discomfort, and he's talking about the mechanics feel for the tools and for the material that he's working with. And this, I think, is then it's not really muscles with us. It's sort of more abstract than that. But are we using the right programming language for the problem at hand? Are we using the right framework? Are we trying to create a single page application using Angular 9.5 alpha when what we should be doing is a server-side application using ASP.NET Core MVC? Physical discomfort, just get a nice chair. And the mechanics feel, he talks about understanding your tools and how a great way to do that is to create your own tools. And I'm not saying that everybody should build their own framework for every project that they work on, but it really helps to build tools occasionally, to reinvent wheels occasionally. I've written a database, I've written an HTTP server just to get a better understanding for how those things actually work. And I think it's a useful thing to do. And maybe one of those times when you're stuck on the actual project you're working on and you need to stop and work on something else, you could just have a little side project where you're working on a tool that you could use or re-implementing some thing like an HTTP server or whatever it might be. It's great practice. And then when you're using those things in your day-to-day work, you'll have a much better understanding of how they work. And so having gone through all of that, he ends up by saying at the end of the day, the real cycle you're working on is a cycle called yourself, which is a bit kind of touchy-feely, it's a bit tree-huggy, it's a bit hippie, but I kind of like it. And I like the idea that at the end of the day, the real software that we're working on is ourselves, and that by making better software and caring more about the craft of making software, we actually make ourselves better and become better people. And so there you go. And that's why I've done this talk, and I hope that you have found it interesting and inspiring, and that it maybe gives you some ideas for changes you can make in the way you work. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mark. So do we have any questions? Lots of thank you in the chat.
Yeah, I brought a book from my bookshelves. It's in my my mother tongue in Turkish. It is it's a very old, I think it's from 1995 or 1994, the edition. And it's one of the first books I bought after buying my bike. So thank you, Mark, really, really much.
Great, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yes, it's a fantastic book. It's one of the books I recommend all software developers to read.
Yeah, and your speech was also fantastic. It's
Thank you so much.
And inspiring.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay. Thank you. Agree with most of the talk. Yeah. So I think everyone now needs to think about where we are going, whether code, whether you're working on something else. You can, all the thoughts that you said, you can put it in any area that you're working with.
Yes, yeah, it applies to everything. Yeah, and you know, meditating is not for everyone, but I like that too.